All right, it is finally here, Diggsy. We're digging for wisdom like we always do, but this is the second season. Diggsy called me up this weekend. He said, man, I'm feeling flushed. I got a headache. My throat's a little sore. I said, man, that's playoff fever, man. You're all right. All you need is a Thursday, Friday, Saturday game, and that'll cure that playoff fever sickness that you got, because we're ready for it. I know you're ready. Are you ready? Because especially
well, the problem was I was screaming at the Plano East game that I was going to. That's not the fever. That's the voice. And I know you're telling me, Diggs, you can't be cheering at these games, not because we care about, we know you're biased about that, but you got to have your voice ready for Monday.
Let me tell you, where you're sitting at these games, you can scream all you want. Holy cow, I went up to give Diggsy some new shirts. That was a journey of a lifetime for me. I thought I was going to collapse. I'm a big boy, man. Y'all see all these chins here. You know I can't be making it up steps, but I was like, if you're going to be way up there, you can cheer as loud as you want. Ain't nobody going to hear you know how.
No one's going to hear me. I got to stay away from everybody else up there. I got to stay away from the coaches' parents so I can just yell and scream.
Right.
But my voice is strong, Lord. I'm good, and I'm ready to speak the wisdom of high school football here on our podcast. And I feel like I got to do a little dance because your music, man. You got the DJ thing going on. You are the producer going on backstage, all the music, all the time. And Lord, we had to basically say goodbye to almost half of the teams we cover every single week. But I mean, we got to say like goodbye to LD Bell. Yeah. I mean, they get to go out in a winning form, and we're not going to talk about you anymore, LD Bell. But man, what a great way!
Yeah, we are going to talk about them because you made a good point. We may be saying goodbye, but this is probably the best way to go out. They had a very good chance of maybe getting stomped out in the first round of playoffs, but to beat your rival, and I saw both sides crying their eyes out after the game. The Trinity kids, are so deep in that Tongan culture to beat them. Hell, their fathers probably beat Bell, and they're the team that didn't beat them, and so they're upset about that because they're going to hear about it. And Bell's crying because it's over, man. Cut those L's off the sign. We got rid of 25 of the L's, and now we've started a new streak. So if you're going to go out, that's the way to go out, right?
Absolutely, and I hope, and we might have to send a camera crew out there. We're going to go ahead and book in because we don't know the day chips. We got realignment. They're going to be together because they're in the same ISD and 6A. I want to see the run-through sign for next year for LD Bell. I guess we could spell Willis, EU, and then a capital L, and we can start this tradition of that, and we'll see how many L's we can get in Willis before Willis is able to take care of business. But I have a theory, Ward. I talk about it on Twitter. It's called win the last game theory. And I kind of came up with it about 10 years ago where Plano East went 0-9, and then they won the last game of the season against McKinney Boyd, and they actually ended up going like 7-3 the next year. And my thought process is if you win that last game, you're happy. You're like thinking all of offseason, you have that optimism and that happiness, and you're practicing and like, okay, we're going to get better because you have that feeling of winning. Everybody else in the state of Texas who makes the playoffs, except for the state champions, they're going to lose. They're going to have that bitter disappointment as they're going into the offseason. But Trinity or Bell and a few others are going to have that optimism of, hey, we won that last game. And I think that's going to be important for their offseason.
Yeah, and not only winning, but winning in that atmosphere, which I still say, if you talk about North Texas, and it's a non-playoff game. You have all your rival games. You got Mound Showdown. You got the Rockwool thing. That's the best atmosphere right there that I've come across. Maybe it's because the stadium doesn't fit as many as some of these other bigger ones do, but they do fit plenty, and every single seat is taken. I told you I went to there the second half. I went to Martin Bowie the first half. I had to follow around some poor lady band parent trying to leave just to get her spot because there's no spots there. I'm rolling the window down. You found it yet? I got 4 minutes till the game starts. Here, hop in. I'll get you there. I got to get in there. But it was just such a great atmosphere, and that's another feeling you have. Not only you win, you won in front of that crowd, then you look at your record at 7-3, and it's not like you had a miserable season and then won the last game. You had a good season. You just didn't show up on a couple, 2-3 games. Other than that, it was a perfect season for Coach Dibble, and hopefully they can build off of that.
Yeah, it's really just one game at the end of the day. If you look at that Weatherford game, if they would have won that Weatherford game, we're talking about LD Bell as the top seed in Division I and second place. But losing to Weatherford by that couple of points, can't lose to Weatherford. I mean, at the end of the day, and they know that, and they've taken ownership of it. I don't hear any LD Bell fans crying or complaining. I mean, this is a great season for them. I mean, they beat the second and third place teams in this district. They just lost to the fourth and sixth place teams in this district, and that's where it goes with LD Bell. But 7-3. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, we're talking about some 3-7 teams that have made the playoffs, and I mean, there were situations in some of the lower classes where 1-8, 1-9 were getting you in some of these smaller districts. LD Bell 7-3 and did not make the playoffs, and that's tough road sometimes.
And if they had made it, they would have had a home game with Keller, and instead it's North Crowley that's playing Keller, and that leads us into bracket talk, where we'll talk briefly on the North Crowley Keller game. Keller,
we got high school number 5 going on over there in Keller. We got.
I looked at the highlights.
How far north is that ISD up there, Ward?
There's a lot of teams. I looked at the highlights that Pox got from that Holsom game, and I saw names that were hurt the whole season. Cameron Rayford was hurt for part of the season. Trey Griffiths was hurt, but he's out there making the touchdown catches. Still only beat Holston by 6 at home in a game they had to win. So, to me, that doesn't bode well for their game up at Crowley ISD Stadium.
Yeah, it really does, and we're going to have a fun bit here, Ward. In NCAA lore, they name the brackets. Like the host city. We got the San Antonio bracket, or we got the Richmond bracket up in your old stopping grounds, or the Georgetown brackets. What city is Georgetown officially in Washington D.C., Ward?
Yeah, it's in D.C. Yep.
So the Washington, D.C. bracket, we'll give them that. So I'm going to name our brackets after the person, and these are 8-team pods. And obviously every 64-team bracket has 8 of these 8-team pods. And I'm going to name them after the team I think is going to win the pod. So our very first pod is going to be the North Crowley pod. And the North Crowley pod, we got North Crowley versus Keller. And the way North Crowley is playing, Keller is just going to have to
take it
to name their score. I can't see North Crowley, especially with Keller's defensive issues. I can't see them being competitive. You looked at what Keller did against Byron Nelson and Southlake. It's going to look like that.
Yep. I agree with you on that, and I'm going to that game only because I've seen North Crowley on our airwaves once, I think, against Lovejoy, and that one they didn't even give their best effort in the first half, which is when we were there before the rains and thunders came. So I'm going to go there just to give them their props. And like you said, if they're naming their score, then I'm naming my highlights 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And they'll probably all be Panther ones. But you never know. I've been looking forward to seeing Trey Griffith all year, and either they weren't throwing to him or he wasn't on the field when I was at games. So it'll be interesting. And the rest, and the winner is going to take on your boys after they get through East Texas. I'm always assuming – or West Texas. I'm assuming West Texas is out of there. I always assume they go out in West Texas and just win that one. So then round 3. No, just kidding. You got Plano East and Prosper going up to Prosper. I know you're going into that stadium to sit way up at the top to watch it. You'll probably bring the beautiful Miss Diggs with you, and you sit way up top in one of your new fresh shirts. What do you expect to see out of that?
Well, I got some bracketology within the bracketology for you, Ward. I like to break these things down. It's what I call transitive games. It's something we do here on the Digging for Wisdom podcast. And we already have a transitive win of Plano East and Prosper this year. Can you name that transitive win? Like the pathway based on all of your knowledge where Plano East has already beaten Prosper this year?
No, break it down for me so I don't have
to do it.
I can't kill my brain.
It goes right through your backyard because remember on October 6th, Plano East beat Flower Mound 41-25. Yeah. We know earlier in the year, Flower Mound beat Lake Highlands 41-21. Lake Highlands beat Jesuit 28-14. Mm-hmm. Jesuit beat Rockwall 60-59, and Rockwall beat Prosper 47-41. So if you look at that and you add up all of those point spreads, that means Plano East is a 57-point favorite over Prosper this week. Right there, that is the digging for wisdom that I know you have come to expect in this field.
I have come to expect you to come up with some wild Plano East stat, but there it is.
And this week on Tuesday, which this will be done by the time our podcast gets posted, we have Plano East versus Prosper in the 3rd round of the volleyball playoffs. So this week we have Plano East and Prosper battling across all spectrums of athletics. If they had water polo, we'd be playing water polo out there as well. But unfortunately, we only got volleyball, and we've got football. I will think that Plano East will win one of those two. Plano East will win one of those two. If we play them in basketball, we'll win two of those three.
Absolutely.
But at least in this, we're going to win one of those two. Prosper, they're a big favorite. Plano East lost their quarterback last week. You saw that. Unfortunately, I think Plano East rallied around that. And at the end of the day, Prosper plays these very high offensive games. Plano East defense has to be able to step up. But I look at the fact that Plano East already played Little Prosper, Rock Hill, and that game was 42-0 Rock Hill at one point before the rains came and mercy was issued and second teamers came out there. Prosper is going to be a big favorite, but Ward, I have to invoke. Do you remember 2018, 2019 Cedar Hill versus Richardson Pierce?
That's right. Pierce did pull that one off, didn't they? That was
anything can happen in the playoffs.
Anything can happen. Over at Prosper, Leo Aguiliano has really made hay with that big Ellis Davis and the big offensive line because he's broken off. He may have worked himself into some sort of a scholarship, maybe Division 2 or 3, just by running by those guys because he takes off for big games. So that'll be a good one. And I think we're both. I mean, not to go too far on this one, but Lake Highlands is probably going to get past SGP. SGP, we were expecting to get in the playoffs at 5-5, where they went in at 3-7. So I think that should be a win for Dean and those guys over there.
Yeah, and really, I'm thinking, I'm kind of just having that dream. If whoever wins this Prosper Plano East game will probably be a favorite in that Lake Highlands South Grand Prairie game. But again, this is the North Crowley bracket, and as dominant as North Crowley has been, even as good as Prosper has played, Prosper feels very disrespected by this podcast Ward. They feel very disrespected by my thoughts on them, because I just feel like this Prosper is a little bit different from those previous Prosper teams. It is not that there's necessarily anything wrong with this Prosper team. Obviously, only beating Trinity by 1 and losing to Rockwall are a little bit suspect. But North Crowley has just emerged as such a regional power that they're so much differentiated from Prosper. I can't see Prosper even being competitive with North Crowley at this point. I mean, this is North Crowley's region to lose. And even though Prosper should have that ability to run behind like Ellis Davis and that, I mean, North Crowley is so athletic defensively. Can they throw the ball against North Crowley? For me, the answer is no. North Crowley should be able to have offensively do whatever they want against Prosper. That's why I call this North Crowley's little district over here, the North Crowley bracket. And at the end of the day, man, North Crowley is just looking good. Coach Gates has got them fired up. And we're seeing all these competitive games. We talked about LD Bell. We talked about Trinity. North Crowley was winning all those games by 30-50, and we're talking about that next tier all being competitive with each other. And North Crowley is playing second teamers in the second half of all of those games. Yeah. Whereas Prosper got through that district. They won, but they had to fight 48 minutes to win all of those games. I just think there's a big differentiation between North Crowley and everybody else in this bracket.
I agree with that for sure. Your next pod, you almost didn't call it the Louisville pod the way they were going in the middle of the season, but this is the Louisville pod because they've kind of righted the ship a little bit, and they're taking on Allen. It's probably, I mentioned before we did the podcast, there's probably about 80% of these games in North Texas that'll be blowouts, maybe 3-score plus games. I don't think this one is, this Louisville Allen game. I think it'll be a tough battle Thursday. Is that where you're going to be headed Thursday night, or are you going to a small school?
I'll be there Thursday night. Credentials pending.
Well, tell me what you think about
Surely Plano will let me in, right?
Yeah,
You'd have to think.
I always send Ted wherever you're at, so guess who you'll see there?
My guy, Ted.
Selfie.
He follows me around. And Kenny's going to be there, too. And Kenny was in Melissa with us this week, so we got the gang back together again.
Hey, y'all need to name yourself, like that Big Brother show. Name your alliance. You'll figure it out. But who do you think? Who do you think is going to come out on top? I still say the Allen quarterback play is so suspect that it might be difficult for them to pull this win off. I'm probably picking Louisville by a couple scores.
When I look at this bracket, I mean, it is wide open, really, at the end of the day. I mean, middle of the legacy up at the top of the bracket has just as much of a claim as Louisville or Allen does. I think the winner of this Louisville-Allen game is probably going to end up going through the third round and winning this pot. I think they're going to get served up to North Crowley in that fourth round, but I think whoever wins this game will definitely be that team to keep an eye on. And really, when it comes to Louisville, when you look at Louisville all season, they have not played a full 48 minutes. You look at that Hebron game this past week. That Hebron game was 13-10 going into halftime, and then Louisville turned it on in the second half. We're past the point where you can play it, you can take a half off.
Right.
If Louisville takes that half off against Allen, Allen is good enough to win that game. Allen is going to play 48 minutes. Talent-wise, Allen does not have near the talent that Louisville does, but they are going to play a much grittier, consistent brand of football than what Louisville has played. All season, we keep looking at Louisville. Quarterback play has been a little suspect for Louisville, and the offensive play calling has been a little suspect for Louisville. They got to get these ships righted if they're going to even beat Allen at this point. But I think Louisville just talent-wise, that offensive line, you talked about Prosper and their ability to just run behind Ellis Davis. Louisville's got 4 or 5 D1 guys that you can run behind. Just run behind them. You run behind them, you're good to go all the way probably through the regional finals, where I believe their path would end anyway. But I think Louisville is good enough to beat Allen. But at the same time, if Allen beats Louisville, am I going to be surprised? Absolutely not.
Right. It's wild to hear you say that, because if you rewind this thing 11 weeks ago, I never would have thought of you saying Louisville, and you just said that this kind of passively, like a little throw-off comment, and Louisville get served up to North Crowley. You can't tell me 11 weeks ago you would have said the phrase served up to North Crowley. You would have said it'd be a heck of a game, and this is what has to happen here and there. But now it's just like, well, if they get there, that's when we'll go ahead and throw the parking brake on and end this thing.
But, there are some teams, and you can turn it on in the playoffs. We see it every single year where, even DeSoto last year, we thought DeSoto had the talent, but they hadn't turned on that light switch until Denton Geyer. Then they turned on that light switch, and we saw them at their peak, and they haven't come down from that. Coach Mathis got the motivation. They took all the chips. They took the voice, and they did everything they did. And DeSoto made it to that next level, and they haven't stopped. I think Louisville has that ability where they can turn it on. I just haven't seen it yet. You got to give me something to make me believe they can turn it on and play that consistent football. I mean, we hyped them up. Highland Park, very first game they had, that was a big game. Okay, they're going to go to Highlander Stadium. They couldn't do it.
They lost you there.
Then Coppell. They're going to, we're back in district. They learned from that Highland Park game. Nope, Coppell took care of business. So can they learn, or can they figure it out? And I don't know what's going on with their quarterback situation. I mean, Terrell is such a good quarterback. I don't know if it's the play calling. I don't know if maybe he's just fighting through an injury or something, and it's good enough to play. But he's just out there, like, he's not running. I compared him to Kyler Murray in our our preseason campfire. Took me a couple of takes to get there, but I compared him to him. And when I watched him out there against Plano East, and even though Louisville was dominant, he just didn't have the speed. So I don't know if there's something there or what's going on. I hope he's healthy. I hope if there is an issue, he's back for the playoffs, because I think Louisville has that infrastructure to be very good. Will they feed Byron Ellison? Will they get behind that offensive line? Or are they trying to be cute? And for 10 weeks, they've been trying to be cute. And I think it's time to get back to brass tacks. Run behind that offensive line. Feed Byron Ellison the ball 30 times. You're going to win a lot of games.
Feed him. By the way, Louisville lost my man Dixie after week 2. And this is his chance, with him sitting in the stands watching, analyzing with his own eyes instead of what he has to read, to tell us if Kenny has a chance. Do they have a chance to win him back? Hey, we mentioned 80% will be blowouts, but 20% won't. And I think there's 2 other games in this pod that could have the potential of being close games. The Timber Creek Trinity game, and I think Berkner Martin has the potential of being really good games. I don't know how much further they can go after that, but in that first round, they have a chance of being 2 really good matchups.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at this Trinity Timber Creek game, I think if I looked at them at their best, Trinity at their best and Timber Creek at their best, Trinity would probably be a 7-point favorite. But Trinity has not played their best hardly at all this year. They have played inconsistently from week 1. Prosper, that Prosper game was probably their best game of the year, and it was a loss. And that was where they had to turn it on in the second half. Timber Creek has played at a high level consistently. We talked about LD Bell being 7-3. Timber Creek is 7-3. What are their 3 losses? Coppell, Carroll, Byron Nelson. This is a team that is playing consistently good football. They had to walk off Keller in that game. It was a late score for them to win, but they were able to do it. I think with that consistency, that leads me to take Timber Creek in this game.
What about Berkner Martin? You think if Berkner's
The way
quarterback?
Arlington Martin played against Bowie, I mean, we know Bergner's hurt, and we know Bergner doesn't have the quarterback, and a couple of their running backs. You know, they are bare bones Berkner right now. But the Martin team that barely beat Arlington Bowie by 1 point, Berkner should still win that game by one or two scores.
Gotcha. Well, let's go down to you had no
And
trouble.
then I get to take credit, Ward, because I picked Berkner to do better, and they're going to win a playoff game if they can beat Arlington Martin.
There you go. And they're going to be playing that dark Wildman Stadium. Wildman Field is a.
Why do you hate Wildman Field so much, Ward?
Well, they need to change them light bulbs from 30 watts to about 120 watts so I can actually see what's going on in the field. All right, let's move down to the pod that you had no trouble naming, the Duncanville pod, because that's clearly what it is. How do you feel in that bracket? Obviously, Duncanville is going to take care of Hutto. We don't even need to talk about that. But Saxe and Rockwall Heath is one of the 20%, one of the games that should be close going into the third, fourth quarter.
It is. I feel like Saxe has all the offensive prowess in this game. I mean, they have that ability. You know, Khalid Lockett. I mean, you get him out there one-on-one. Who is Rockwall Heath going to have to answer him? Their quarterback, Brendan George. Who is going to answer him? Rockwall Heath just doesn't have those flashy players who are going to be able to be competitive with them. But I always think of if we're playing old school pick'em, we line up all 44 players and we're going to go 1-1-1-1 and just go back and forth. Saxe's probably going to get the first few of those picks, but in the middle there, that 10 to 30, it's going to be Rockwall Heath. A lot of their unsung heroes have really been stepping up, and they are peaking. That's what Coach Webb does. He takes these kids, even though they don't have the flashiest names and the flashiest stats, but he is getting them to play at a high level. Look what they just did against North Forney. Absolutely dominated them. I can't pick against Coach Webb. I'm taking Rockwall Heath in this game.
All right, that'll be interesting. It'll be at HBJ, too, so that'll be a true road game for them, so that'll be a pretty interesting matchup. You look at the Houston side of this bracket. You got the Woodlands and Spring.
You look at the Houston side of this bracket, Ward. I'm out on Houston. We can't even agree what Houston is, Ward. You're probably going to tell me the Woodlands is like north middle 45, not even Houston.
The Woodlands is North Houston. The Woodlands have hellified offensive weapons, but the thing is with them, when it comes to defense, when against good teams, they get the old folding chairs out and they fold up like them folding chairs when it comes to good offenses. And as you saw against Willis, North Shore, they played another team earlier in the season, Lamar, who's also a team that you should keep your eye on. That's a very under the radar team because they play in Houston ISD, but we'll get to them in a little bit. That's why out of that small four pod down there that gets to get beat by Duncanville, the Woodlands takes care of Spring. But I don't know if they take care of Klein Collins. Klein Collins has the defense and the offense as well, running at all cylinders. I think that's a sleeper team to go 3 rounds. Klein Collins is, and then we get wherever they're going to play. I mean, Duncan would just be like, play it wherever you want to, because we're going to go ahead and take care of business in that one. But that's my Houston site on that joint. This is the bottom part of this bracket is wild to me. Well, no, this isn't Division 2. Division 2 is the one that's wild. We'll get to Division 2. Talk to me about Rockwall Wiley. We both think that Wax will probably beat Midway, but what do you think about how badly do you think Rockwall will beat this really reeling Wiley team?
I mean, Wiley, they're done. I mean, I hate to be that blunt about it. Wiley East broke them, or Wiley East exposed them. Whatever, broke them, exposed them. This is not the Wiley team that beat Hebron earlier in the year. I mean, if you look at that Wiley team, the way they beat Hebron, the way they were competitive with Pierce, and then at the end of the schedule, it's got to be injuries. There's something happened with after that Wiley East game, but it is not the same team. Rockwall is going to be able to name their score against Wiley. We're calling this the Rockwall bracket, by the way, the Rockwall half, unless you have a Houston objection. I mean, Cybridge, I know you don't like to call them Cybridge, but I don't understand why they can be part of an ISD and not be called their ISD. Like, why don't we call them Fairbanks? We call them Cypress Fairbanks, but we can't call them Cypress Bridgeland.
And you have to have the dash in there, too, Cy-Dash Fair. The other ones don't have the dash.
What about Cy-Dash Bridge? That's what I'm calling them, Cybridge.
No, I'm calling
it. It's like a science fiction thing.
Bridgeland and Westfield are good squads, and that's going to be an interesting second round matchup. Klein Kane's not that bad either. I say that, and then they gave up Denver Bronco type numbers to Tomball Memorial earlier this year. But I'm predicting a Bridgeland Westfield game, and Westfield is this. The deal is they get in that 14-6A and they just don't get to play anybody. They play a decent Decaney team, decent Nimitz team. It's not anything that's going to really shock you. And Bridgeland's playing decent competition throughout. I think Bridgeland goes on, but when they face Rockwall, I think Rockwall wins that one.
I mean, I would say just on name value, not knowing anything about Houston, not producing a Houston show like you do. I mean, the names I hear every year, Bridgeland is getting to that point. I mean, Bridgeland and Tomball, especially in Division II, have kind of made their round. But we're always talking about Spring Westfield, it feels like. The last time Plano East made a big run to the playoffs, who ended us? Spring Westfield. That was our last big run in 2011 or something back there. And so Spring Westfield, I don't like Spring Westfield. They're just like that team that's always making trouble for DFW area teams. And I think Rockwall has a little bit of a history of Spring Westfield as well. So that's the team I'm worried about because they seem to find that playoff switch. Yeah. And when they get in there, they're used to going these 2-3 rounds, and they're a very dangerous team. And you even look back at what they've done against Duncanville in the past. They haven't really, been super competitive with Duncanville, but they've given Duncanville a little bit of a push more than any of the other teams. So Westfield – last year is the team I'm a little concerned about.
Yeah, last year was the last play of the game. They had to, Duncanville had to make a stop. But, man, I got that bad taste from 2 years ago when they straight up quit against Duncanville. They quit in the second quarter. Duncanville was playing out of their minds. I really don't know how they lost to North Shore in the state final because the way they were rolling right along. But Westfield kind of straight up quit on that one, and it sticks in my head. That's the kind of mentality they have, but they kind of took away from it when they gave Duncanville probably their toughest game in the postseason until they got to the finals. And then this year they graduated a lot. They graduated a quarterback. They still got some good players like Taji Atkins at running back. It's just the whole Bridgeland thing is they got a new head coach, and I figured, okay, they're going to take a step down with the new head coach. And they took a step up. They're 9-1. They only lost a 1-point game to Summer Creek, I believe, in the non-district. It was their only loss. And by the way, a spoiler there, it's going to be Summer Creek and DeSoto in the D2 final this year, by the way, 6A D2. Go ahead and mark that down. Who's marking the stuff? I got to get some interns in here. That's your 6A D2 final. But I don't know. I feel Bridgeland's going to take it past Westfield, and that game against Rockwall is going to be pretty intense. I'm assuming it's going to be at McLean Stadium. That's where Bridgeland took care of Rockwall. Rockwall Heath took care of Bridgeland when they faced there 2 years ago with Hoover out there, and Bridgeland had the quarterback that's a Texas A&M and Connor Wegman. But that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
So we got a Hoover on the field and a Lock on the field. Are we back in 2019, 2020?
Yeah.
Just the more things change. We got Hoovers and Locks and all kinds of things out here. But I'm still calling it the Rockwall bracket.
Well, what are we calling? Now. What are we calling the next one? We're calling it the South Lake Carroll bracket because
South Lake Carroll bracket.
Despite the loss, this is to Byron Nelson. This is their bracket. We got a couple games that could go either way. I don't even really think so. We have them on the run sheet here: Highland Park and Arlington, McKinney and Marcus. I wanted Marcus to come out at a game that I was going to be there for 3 quarters, and I usually am not at games 3 quarters unless they're state title games. I wanted them to show me why I should be picking them against McKinney because McKinney's given me all the reasons to pick them because of the whole deal without a quarterback and an offensive line. That's a solid deep run, but Marcus didn't show me anything but interceptions. They obviously made some plays late in the fourth to do stuff, so I can't see them competing with McKinney.
I can't see them competing with McKinney either, except for the fact that McKinney seems to be this broken shell of a team that is still trying to figure out themselves. You look at the final score against Prosper, you're like 24-12, okay, but that game was 24-0 at one point. Yeah. And, I mean, Prosper was just dominating McKinney. And then you go back to that, their win against Denton Guyer, which you call the puke bowl or whatever, because Denton Guyer had all the flu symptoms on the sidelines or whatever. And then you see how Denton Guyer has come back. I guess they got that flu system out of there, and McKinney just hasn't figured it out. And you're starting to look at all these wins that McKinney have, and you're starting to go, well, what about this and what about this? McKinney losing to Allen by 24, losing to Prosper by 12. This McKinney is a weaker McKinney team. But now you're looking at this bracket, and you're like, well, I mean, there's not a big time game against South Lake Carroll, and we know how they showed out against South Lake Carroll last year. So can McKinney, like we talked about with Louisville, figure it out, turn it on late? Can Coach Shavers, you have to go see Coach Shavers up in the press box watching that Flower Mound and Marcus and Plano East game. Can Shavers put on that magic dust and turn this thing around? I'm going to say no, because I think past predictions give us a little bit of insight into future. I think Highland Park is probably the better team out of this 4-pack, and I think Marcus can push them, because Marcus got humbled against Plano East. I think there was a case, and Benedetto even said this to a certain extent in the post-game interview, that he thought that Marcus kind of came in looking at the fact that they've beat Plano East by 120 points the last 3 years and kind of we got this, we can do it, and they weren't ready for what Plano East has. Now they're the underdogs. Now they're the prohibitive underdogs, and they're going to come out with a chip on their shoulder. I think this is a potential upset watch game. I'm going to take McKinney, but it would not surprise me to see Marcus come out there and give him 48 minutes of hell.
That would surprise me. So I'd be interested to see that. And is there anything to the fact, because we're going to go switch down to the Highland Park Arlington game, the fact that those type districts, we talked about 5-6A and all their big games were at the end, the 7-6A, all of them at the end, at the beginning. Is there anything to that we haven't really talked about Highland Park for what seems like 3-4 weeks, because they've been playing Irving schools and the lesser Richardson schools? Is there a chance that they could come out sloppy? I mean, maybe not sloppy enough to lose to Arlington, but maybe damper our hopes a little bit.
A little bit, because right now we know that they're, when we don't know their quarterback health, we know that I saw them against Richardson, and their quarterback got hurt, and he did not come back last week. Parker Thompson played in that game against Richardson Pierce, which they dominated. And to me, them beating Richardson Pierce the way they did, given that Jesuit and some of the other teams struggled with Richardson Pierce, they still were able to figure that out. But Parker Thompson is a run-first quarterback. He's not a pass-first quarterback. And if Arlington has the athletes to be competitive with that run game, it could create a little bit of an issue. But Arlington has not shown defensively right now, even though they shut out Sam Houston, had a big kind of a grand finale. I just don't trust Arlington against Highland Park, but I do think Arlington has the athletes to be competitive against a banged-up Highland Park team that is still trying to figure out themselves. Now, if Warren Peck is back, he might come out there and torch the Arlington secondary for 400 yards, because Arlington is very suspect in the secondary. But they've been playing close games, so this is one of those games that if you told me that Highland Park's going to win this game by 6 scores, I'd believe you. If you brought it and it was a 35-28 game, I'd believe you too. So I think the spectrum of potentiality across this game is very wide, but I still think most of those results have Highland Park winning.
And yeah, exactly. And one thing I'm pretty sure of is Highland Park will win because of the whole thing. It's not a neutral site game. It's at Highland Park Stadium or Highlander Stadium. So in my eyes, that's a win. It's right there. Now, this next bracket, this next pod, you call the Byron Nelson pod, but we very well could have called it the Capel pod because of the way Capel is playing under Antonio Wiley. They have put together an undefeated season. They're playing good. They found something in Eddie Griffin. Tell me, their first matchup, though, is a very tough one. It's going to be our game of the week. They're taking on Geyer. Geyer very well could throw out a couple of these athletes like Caden Cobbs and Eli Bowen and Josiah Martin at wide receiver and do some things that they didn't expect. So tell me what you think about that one before we go to why you call it the Byron, why you eventually chose on the Byron Nelson pod, because that Capel Geyer game is very intriguing to me.
It is our game of the week, and I'm excited to see the highlights. And who's filming that game, Ward?
That's my man Pox.
Pox. Pox tells a story like nobody else. So you're going to get great footage when it comes to that. This is an incredibly tough draw for Capel. I mean, at the end of the day, Capel is 10-0 looking at things, but I don't know how well our District 6-6A really prepared them for this level of competition. Then you go back to their non-district schedule. Keller, Timber Creek, Saxe. I mean, Capel was not playing the elite of the elite. You look at what Denton Geyer has faced. They faced Alito. They faced Allen. They faced Prosper. So Den Geyer, we talk about it in many ways. Den Geyer is going to look across at Coppell, and Coppell is just one of 5 or 6 teams that are very similar to games that they played. Coppell is going to look across the field, and that's probably the best team that they've seen. So that's going to be a little bit of a gut check. It's going to be a little bit of a reaction. I think Den Geyer is going to probably get up on them a little bit early because of that, and then Coppell is going to have to settle in and take care of business. What I really like Coppell has done in 6-6A is they have done it with defense. They're not flashy. I mean, they're not necessarily a vertical offense. They're doing bubble screens and jet sweeps and things like that, but their offensive line is good. Their linebackers are good. Their secondary is good. Tipton is a great dual threat guy on both sides of the ball if they want to, depending on how they want to use him. I just think Coppell has too many offensive weapons for Denton Geyer. Denton Geyer's been a little bit more inconsistent. I think Geyer's going to get out early on him, but Coppell is going to roar back. I think we're looking at a 28-21 game, but this would not surprise me at all because it is a tough road. Geyer was a state semifinalist last year, Ward, and Coppell unexpectedly wins the district. Can they take that momentum and push it to the next level? It's going to be tough for him, but I trust Coach Wiley and I trust that squad, but it is not going to be easy.
Yeah, and if they get past one, is that a team that they can make a run, like a deeper run? Even they get Jesuit Bowie the next round, but even past that, and maybe even past Byron, can they get past Byron? I don't even know if they can get past.
I don't think they can get past Byron because Byron does what Coppell does. I mean, they're very similar kind of teams, defense first, but Byron Nelson has done it a little bit more. I think Byron Nelson has a better defense. I think they have the same kind of offensive tools. They don't have the big names. They have a couple of pieces. I think this is why I call it the Byron Nelson bracket. I think it is theirs to lose, but certainly that would be a fun game. But Den Geyer against Byron Nelson would be a fun game as well, and that's been a rivalry over the last few years, one of those underrated rivalries. So who's going to happen? They're all very evenly matched. So it's going to come down to game planning. It's going to come down to performance. And Byron Nelson showed me that they can give you that performance against Southlake. But then I look at how things are going. I think we're going to have a Southlake Byron Nelson rematch. Can they do it when it counts? I know one of their receivers is expected to come back around Thanksgiving, and that could give them an element. Because if you remember, we talked about that Carroll Byron Nelson game. One of the elements that I kind of looked at was it didn't look like that Southlake Carroll could extend the field on Byron Nelson. And now it's kind of coming out that maybe there are some injuries involved with that. So can Byron Nelson continue that defensive pressure when, maybe Knowles isn't having to force the ball down the field because he's got a receiver who can, maybe win some 50-50 balls.
Yeah. The other game in that bracket that has a chance of being a close one is the Jesuit Bowie game. Bowie kind of emptied the tank against Martin. They did onside kicks galore. They went for 2 down at the end there to get that win. Is that something where you put it all out on the table in this game, and what do you have left against Jesuit?
To be somewhat disrespectful, I look at the fact that in non-district, because you get all these games in 8-6A where they're all playing each other and they're kind of showing out against each other. I think Arlington Martin, not competitive against Cedar Hill. Arlington Bowie lost to 0-7 Plano, their very last non-district game. I think Jesuit's going to have a field day against Bowie. Yeah. I think Arlington ISD is what we thought they were at the end of non-district, and then when they started getting in district, they started putting up big numbers against each other, which kind of gave us a little bit of hope. But then we saw with Arlington Martin and Arlington Bowie, I think they are who they are, and I think Jesuit should take care of business.
So you're looking at a 7-6A sweep?
Yes.
My man. All right.
6A, we fired them. We're all gone.
They're all out.
Now we're going to fire them out of the playoffs. I fired them out of the rankings, firing them out of the playoffs.
My man. Get them out of there. All right, let's move down to the lower half. This is obviously the DeSoto.
You want 2 halves to shoot, right, Ward? You're tired of these 1-half games, so we got to get 8-6A out of here. And that being said, 8-6A is probably going to win 3 out of 4, right? They're going to play this clip, and we're going to look like idiots.
You're going to get some emails.
You're going to look like a genius.
We're going to figure this all out. All right, this obviously is the DeSoto bracket, but, man, I wish there's a way, and no disrespect to all the other teams. Of course, if you say that, that obviously means you are going to disrespect them. But, man, can we fast forward to the third round? I want to see this DeSoto Willis game so bad. I can't even sleep at night. I'm up all night in cold sweats, talent all over the place. I think DeSoto would win that one, but Willis has so many athletes all over the place. I mean, a spoiler. both of those coaches are for those two teams are in the runnings for respective coach of the year in their areas. But man, is DeSoto going to have a game until they get there? I don't think so. Wiley East and who's Wiley East playing? I forget. Tyler Legacy. That's probably in my eyes that's a Wiley East win, and then that's a DeSoto big win. And then if you look at the Houston side of things, Willis will have no problem with Nimitz, and Tomball Memorial may be able to score with them, but then they're going to take care of Tomball Memorial, and then that puts the Willis DeSoto game. Again, every time it's that, I always feel like it's going to be at McLean or Waco ISD. Either way, it should be a sweet matchup. If I could get you in a car and drive down there, I know you'd want to see it. I know you'd want to see it on a Saturday. Let's ride together, man. You want to ride?
Well, if we're going to talk about this, Ward, because, if we're all digging for wisdom here on the DFW podcast, tell us a little bit about Willis, because what you're talking about, Willis, I need to know a little bit. We know about it because we cover all these things, and you're a Houston guy, and you're cutting these things up. But I don't think necessarily the casual fan really knows what Willis is. This is not a name that we're used to hearing in November and December. And then, we know about their quarterback, but you tell us about why he's special. Well, we're going to have DJ versus DJ, because I don't think the casual listener knows.
Yeah, DJ versus DJ. There's two names you need to know about when you talk about Willis. DJ Lagway is the first, and that's what the whole nation knows because he's heading to Florida. He's thrown for over 4,000 yards. He runs all over the place. And unlike DJ Bailey, he has to throw for 4,000, 5,000 yards because the defense is letting up a ridiculous amount of points. And that's the thing that's going to make me pick DeSoto to beat Willis when they play because the defense just can't make stops. And so for Lagway, he's like, that's fine. It pads my stats, makes me look like the greatest quarterback of all time, which he may be. He's so calm in the pocket. He can throw on the run, throw off his back foot. He can take off running. He had a little bit of a hamstring deal this last game that we saw, but that can easily be cleared up in the next 3 weeks. And the other name is Jermaine Bishop Jr. I don't know if a lot of people know about him. He's a sophomore coming up. He's an athlete. He plays defense and offense, and he just makes plays. And I talked to Coach Miller about him maybe it was about 6-7 weeks ago, and I said, man, who is this Bishop kid? And I said, he said to me, he's going to be the best player I've ever coached. I said, well, you're coaching DJ Lagway right now. He said, I said what I said. So this Bishop kid is a nasty guy too, and that's somebody Claude Mathis is going to have to game plan for. If they go score for score when those two teams play, it's going to be about as fun as you're going to see a game. But if DeSoto makes stops, because I don't think Willis is going to make stops, then maybe DeSoto takes off and wins that one by 21 because this is the best season Willis has had since 1962. So it's been a while since they've been 10-0 and doing things. Heck, what is that? 8 decades? It's been quite a while. But it will be a fun game. And I can't believe me and you are going to ride down there. We're going to stop and get some kolaches, even though I don't even like those. Well, that's probably going to get me run out of the state.
Thanksgiving weekend.
Probably going to get run out of the state for saying that. But me and you are going to roll down there. We're going to shoot a bunch of Waco games together. I'll leave you at McLean so you can see a doubleheader, 12 o'clock in a night game. I'll run over to Waco ISD Stadium and get one as well. It's going to be a fun time had by all, buddy.
I like that we're already producing week 3 highlights. That's the way you got to think at the end of the day. Well, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I don't trust DeSoto. And, there's some elements, and I think they got so fired up for Duncanville and, the name Duncanville. I don't think the name Willis is going to, scare them because, and I think their coach is going to have to do a good job of finding the social media clips, getting this kind of information out there to get that chip on the shoulder. Because I think if we just at the very beginning of the season said DeSoto Willis 3rd round, what you think about it without knowing any of the players or whatnot, you're not going to get excited about that game. It's just two schools that are playing each other that have no history, no name value. And I think DeSoto really thrives on that chip. And what is Willis going to give them? And maybe the little bit of a play with the DJ versus DJ thing. Who's the better DJ? Because DeSoto has really taken pride on the fact that their DJ has been under the radar, even though he's been playing great, and he's not getting the D1 offers, but he goes out there and he's the best quarterback on the field every single week. Even against Duncanville, he was the best quarterback on the field that week. So what is DeSoto going to be able to do? Now, to go back to the bracketology side of things, I think Wiley East is going to push them. I don't think it's going to be, they're going to win or even be a threat of that. Wiley East is playing at a very high level that they've figured it out, and they can score the ball. And they got some playmakers on defense. So, I mean, I'm not saying DeSoto's going to lose that game, but if that game was 62-38 or something, that wouldn't surprise me that Wiley East is able to go score for a little while until DeSoto gets those couple of stops, like you think the Willis game may be, and then, ends up being a little bit more lopsided. But this is DeSoto's bracket, but Willis, if they get a defensive stop, if they get a turnover, if they get that, and you got those special players out there, that is definitely an upset pick. And Willis has been DeSoto's been the kind of team. They don't travel very well, and they're going to have to go out there to Waco and win a big game against an unknown team with athletes. And that's that trust factor that I don't necessarily have with DeSoto right now. Again, I don't do Houston, so I'm gonna have to learn about Willis the next couple of weeks to truly have a little bit more insight. But I mean, you just gave them a great pitch. Two of the best players on the field. Defense is questionable, but at the same time, we thought Duncanville's defense was really good, and they couldn't slow down DeSoto. So it might just be, can Willis's offense play perfect and maybe get a 2-point conversion late? That might just be the only way you can deal with that kind of a game, or get a special teams play. But I know Willis is probably looking at the tape right now, trying to figure out what can we do to get a little bit of an edge right now. And I don't even think Harker Heights is not necessarily a good draw for them. I'm going back and forth because when I was looking at 12-6A very early on in the season, I thought we might see 12-6A 2-3, be able to at least split with the 11-6A teams. But now that they've all played each other, and Pflugerville, Weiss, and Midway and Harker Heights have all kind of split against each other, and you look at Midway losing to Mansfield earlier in the season, we may see an 11-6A sweep. They just may go ahead and take care of business in this thing, which kind of leads us to the bottom half of the bracket. Yeah. And unless you see something in Houston, Ward, I think this is probably the worst of all of these 18 pods of any of the 6A teams.
Thing I was going to say to you, I'm looking at this thing. I don't know much about Pflugerville Weiss except for what they did with DeSoto for a half last year in the playoffs, but there's a theory that Cedar Hill could make it out of that thing. I mean, this bottom half, and I'll start right away with the Houston teams because you had mentioned what about Tomball? I'm not going to, Tomball's like the Prosper. They trick me every year. They're not tricking me this year. They're not that good of a team. They're 6-4. They barely made the playoffs. They're in it, but they're not going to do anything. And I'm standing by it this time. Don't fool me again, Tomball. They're not. They may even lose that first game against Cy Falls. But last year when I looked at the 4 Houston teams, and the one that made it to the third round was Decaney, and it was because Decaney had a star receiver in Jonah Wilson. Well, this year they have a star receiver in Tanook Hines, who is a junior, but Oak Ridge has 2 star defensive players that are both going to Georgia together. Justin Williams, who's maybe the best linebacker in the state, and then Joseph Ajane, who's a humongous defensive lineman. So they got great defensive players, but you look at their box scores, they're still giving up points like galore. They're giving up 30 to 40 points a game. That tells me that people are running away from them and exposing the other 9 players. So whoever makes it out of those 4, which right now I'm kind of saying the winner of the Oak Ridge Decaney team makes it to that third round, I'm not sure they do anything against the DFW team. Whether it be Cedar Hill, man, is it Cedar Hill? You tell me about the top half, because I keep looking at North Forney Garland, and that doesn't do much for me as far as thinking they're going more than beating each other.
Yeah, I mean, Cedar Hill is statistically, if you look at the computer poll, the favorite to get out of this 18 pods. And I'm thinking to myself, after watching Cedar Hill just get destroyed by the teams they got destroyed by, how are they going to go 3 rounds deep? But they're kind of a favorite. When you really start to break down these teams, Pflugerville Weiss is probably their hardest game. Yeah. And then North Forney, poor Coach Lester right now is hearing this podcast and thinking, we had a bad week against Rockwall Heath, but at our best, we're good enough to win this region. This is 8 teams that are all evenly competitive. This almost kind of reminds me of, like the Garland ISD district, where you just have everybody so compacted, and somebody's going to get out of this. And I don't think it's going to be a big name at all. Cedar Hill has a resume. Pflugerville Weiss has a resume. You mentioned even Tomball can find a way to, even though you don't really, Oak Ridge with that defense, if they can figure out how to, to figure out the other 9 there. You can flip a coin on all of on this 8. As of now, because of Cedar Hill and their resume and their running game and the fact that they're healthy, I think it's going to be Cedar Hill getting out of this. But it just seems disingenuous to think that Cedar Hill is going to be the team to beat all 8 of these teams, given how evenly matched everybody is. How is Cedar Hill going to play when they're playing evenly matched teams? I don't know, because they've had to play way above them and way below them. They don't look good when it's way above them, but they look pretty good when it's below them. Can they play 3 games against 3 evenly matched teams? I don't know how they're going to fare in those games. That's why I don't have much faith in Cedar Hill, because we just don't have much evidence. We look at Rockwall. Rockwall was the closest one they had, and by halftime, you're flipping like, what are we going to do? I'm bored because Rockwall took care of them in such a big way. Now, they are a little bit better than they are now, but Rockwall is also better than they are right now. So Cedar Hill I like the fact that Cedar Hill has a good running game as well. And that's something that travels in November. I don't know. You could tell me these Houston schools, if they run the ball, throw the ball, whatever is the case may be. But Cedar Hill able to run the ball and run the ball consistently behind that defensive line, you got to like that in November.
I will tell you a little tidbit about Oak Ridge. It's their running back. They got 2 running backs. One of them, Frankie Arthur, is a half brother of Adrian Peterson, which feels weird because Adrian Peterson's 40-something and he's an 18-year-old, but that's the way it goes sometimes. That's the way it goes.
Well, I have an interesting fact for you, too, because, Plano East, one of our offensive linemen, Marcus Lee, is the brother of Keith Lee, who was a professional wrestler in his 30s. So stuff happens.
It is, well.
I don't know about halves and quarters and all that.
What if Garland goes 3 rounds? 2 years after they had that mega team that got beat in the first round.
It could happen. I mean, they're probably, of all those 8 teams, if I was ranking them from 1 to 8, I'd probably put Garland 8. But the gap between 1 and 8 in this district is not nearly what it is in some of these other brackets. The difference between 1 and 8 in this pod is kind of the difference between 1 and 3 in some of the other pods, where we're expecting a Duncanville, DeSoto, North Crowley domination kind of an element. But Garland, ever since you've disrespected them, they've figured it out. And now North Forney, can you with certainty tell me that you think that Garland has no chance against North Forney?
No, I can't tell you that. I can't tell you anything in that bottom half. Whatever happens, it will shock me and it will not shock me all at the same time.
All simultaneous. You're going to be shocked and not shocked all at the same time. And North Forney has just as good of a resume to make it through that 3 rounds as well. And what a great story that would be for Coach Lester and that squad to go from undesirable last year to undeniable. Now, again, not looking good in the 4th round. Whoever wins this pod is probably going to be a huge underdog to DeSoto or Willis, if you want to throw Willis in there. I think there's a big gap between those 2 in the bottom 8 of this pod. But it's going to be fun because one of these 2 teams, 2 of these 8 teams are going to be playing Thanksgiving football, and that's going to be huge for their program.
That's awesome. We're moving to 5A, and maybe I have a bone to pick with you on the naming of this bracket. Why is it not the Midlothian bracket? You've got this Denton Ryan bracket, and all you've been doing is doing your Friday night thing on them all week, dumping on them. And here they are, and you gave them the title of the bracket. Talk to me about this side of the pot.
Midlothian let me down this week. They lost to Red Oak, and they weren't even playing competitive against Red Oak. At least Denton Ryan got up on Red Oak last year in the playoffs 21-0 before they blew it. I mean, Midlothian, we just don't know what they're going to be. I know you got to chat with Wesco on the bobbleheads and all the great stuff there, but Midlothian let me down against Red Oak, and they did it with their style of football with second half turnovers. You cannot turn the ball over, and now their first draw is against Justin Northwest, who's feeling a little bit slighted after Denton Ryan took care of business. Who is going to win that game is going to be big. But Denton Ryan, I talked about teams figuring it out. They look like they have figured it out. But they have an incredibly tough game against Lake Belton to get started out with. It's going to be athletes versus athletes. So can Denton Ryan outshoot Lake Belton? Because Denton Ryan's been doing it with defense, keeping teams down. Lake Belton's going to be able to score on them. But can Denton Ryan outscore them? Because like you were talking about with some of the teams in Houston, Lake Belton can't stop anybody.
Yeah, exactly. That was going to be a fun game, I think. I like the guy we haven't talked too much about it with Ryan this whole year is Dylan Arkansas on the defensive side of the ball. He seems to make big plays when they need him most, at least when our cameras are there. So that'll be an interesting one. I think Midlothian's going to win against Northwest, and then they head out to some West Texas nonsense going on.
Tascosa does not like being referred to as West Texas nonsense, by the way, and they will let you know next week. They don't like that. I have a rivalry with some schools. Tascosa and I have had a little bit of a rivalry over the while because they don't like that we are the Metroplex elite out here and completely, foo-fooing Tascosa. But Tascosa, who I would imagine is a favorite over Del Valle, they are not the Tascosa I remember in the last couple of years. I think they're probably not going to be super competitive. But obviously, Midlothian knows Tascosa very well. They're going to be pointing at each other in the Spider-Man meme. But at the end of the day, I think Denton Ryan, and you also have to look at this as kind of a sigh of relief because as we move to the next half of the bracket, you're avoiding Aledo all the way to the regional finals in this half of the bracket. So you have a chance to get things right, get things healthy without having to have that inevitable game against Toledo. So the big dogs in this district, and Abilene can even be included in this, Denton Ryan or Lake Belton or Abilene or Northwest or Midlothian have to be breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief. I kind of joked about on the dump this past week that Midlothian might have been throwing that game against Red Oak just to avoid Aledo because they flipped Aledo last year for home and home, so they would have to have returned that in the third round of the playoffs, and they'd have to go out to Buchanan Stadium for that game. And they still might if it is Midlothian's bracket. But man, Denton Ryan has figured it out, and I think they really enjoyed our podcast this year because I think we have fueled that fire for Denton Ryan.
Exactly. We showed you, Diggsy. Let's go down to the next pod.
I am shown.
Well, you're going to get some, probably not too much because you're still going to pick Aledo to win. But the fact that you didn't call it the Aledo pod is going to get people upset. You've called it the Red Oak pod for this next 8. Why is that? Why is it not Aledo?
It is the Aledo pod. I don't know what you're talking about, Ward. I mean, my second choice would have been the Lubbock Cooper pod.
Oh, maybe I read it wrong. I apologize.
Yeah, maybe you read it wrong.
Glaucoma's setting in. God, help me out. Pearl Vision. Yes,
Aledo Lubbock Cooper will be a fun game in the second round just because they have a little bit of history there as well. But Aledo is just so much better. I think a lot of the questions about Aledo is if you look at their box score the last couple of weeks, you don't see Haas Haney in there. And so is Aledo going to get healthy at the right – they're still winning by 50 points, but are they going to get healthy at the right time? What are the injury prognoses on that? Are they just holding him out? We don't know because we're not the athletic trainers, and Aledo's certainly not going to send us their injury report from week to week because Denton Ryan didn't do that. I remember we were talking about with that Denton Ryan Aledo game last year. We need Denton Ryan's injury report to try to figure all this out, and then Aledo goes in there and takes care of business. Red Oak, Burleson, Centennial is a scary game for Red Oak in the first round because Burleson Centennial is like a sleeping giant. They ended up 4th place in that district. But if they can run the ball against Red Oak, they might be able to do a little bit of something. I'm taking Red Oak, but I think this is part of that 20% of games that could be competitive.
Interesting. And I was just thinking back to what we talked about in the offseason with Aledo, how we both kind of said, well, they won't get a competitive game till week 15, but they did. They got a 6-point game with Ryan early. So that may help them through this playoff run because they've got the little scare in them, and they now know what that scare feeling feels like. And they didn't have to wait till week 15 for it to hit them. So that's a pretty cool little deal, buddy.
All right. Good, valid point, Ward. Good job, Ward. I like when you make good football points.
It's very rare, but I did it.
I have to say, just between me and you, I think this has been your best podcast, your best performance on a podcast yet.
Me. My man, he's about ready to
your best performance. You're giving us Houston information. You're dropping names of Houston people. I mean, you're giving us insight into campfire stuff, Ward. You are in playoff form. I applaud you, Ward.
I feel like I'm getting critiqued.
Why can't I get this performance in week 3 out of you, Ward?
I don't know. I phoned it probably because you made us do the podcast at 11 p.m. on week 3, and I didn't know what planet I was on at that time. I got to give me some rest. This next pod is the Forney pod, and that's a little respect to my man Fleener, even though I probably would call it the Lone Star pod. But the Forney pod and Forney, that 8-5A Division I district was so jacked up that I bet Fleener and all the other ones were preparing for one team, and after week 11, they had to switch everything up. I mean, and pick somebody else because now they're, Forney's facing Port Arthur Memorial. They probably thought they were going to face somebody else. All these other teams, LaPorte's playing Lancaster, and that's that's in a lower bracket. But these are all teams that they probably didn't think they were facing after week 10, and now after week 11, this is where we're at.
And this can go either way, because when you have these 1, 2, 3, 4s, and you basically have a three-way tie for first place, even though it ended up not being a three-way tie, but all four of these teams seem very competitive with each other. Like there's not much of a difference. A turnover here, a turnover there. We could have seen 4 turn into 1, 1 turn into 4. Whereas I think in 7-5A there is a pretty good distinction between the top of this bracket and the bottom of this bracket. It really makes you wonder, and it kind of reminds me of 12-6A insofar as I feel like this past week, Ward, a little bit of the luster of what I was expecting out of 8-5A kind of lost its shine with some of these losses this past week, to where maybe they're not as good as we thought they were. Whereas Lancaster, I think, is playing at a high level right now, despite the fact that they had to limp into the playoffs. Longview is playing at a high level. Forney versus Port Arthur Memorial is a very interesting game. I think if you had asked me at the beginning of the season, I would have picked Port Arthur Memorial just based on the names, and we'd be talking about the Port Arthur Memorial bracket. But the fact that they have fallen the way they have in their district play kind of makes me think that Forney is going to take care of business against Port Arthur Memorial. But you, as a Houston area expert, and Port Arthur as a Houston area team, I think you have more insight, as this is your realm.
No, just like you, that's the Port Arthur Memorial is just a name to me. That's not a Houston team. That's just a name. I got to go by the name.
Houston.
I go by the Houston teams in that district, which are Barbers Hill, LaPorte.
Get on I-10, and you're right there. You're right there at Port Arthur Memorial. Just like you go down US 80, you're right there in Forney.
The fact that Forney gets the home game is a nice little plus for them. I think they can make something happen out there in Forneyville, Jackrabbit World, or whatever you want.
And we talk about home field advantages, Ward. I hate to cut you off on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Forney is one of those teams that will have a home field advantage. They will pack that place out. This city is a very North Forney is kind of the redheaded stepchild when it comes to this. They will come out for Forney, and I think not only will they come out and fill off the home side, I think they're going to probably be filling in some of the visitor side to get in that thing. It is going to be a great environment. And I don't know if Port Arthur Memorial has experienced that kind of environment that's going to be going against them, because they're going to have maybe 100 Port Arthur Memorial parents driving out to this game, and Forney's probably going to bring 8,000 out. So it's going to be a pretty good home field experience for Forney.
And, we've done this in the other pods. I like to look ahead a little bit, and I am if this happens to play out, because I think Richland beats Frisco, and I do think Barbers Hill beats McKinney North. I am very intrigued by the Barbers Hill Richland game, and it's probably going to go under the radar because they're not big names, but and it's not going to, nobody's going to have a home field advantage. They're going to play somewhere neutral, God knows where, but I think that's going to be a very intriguing game just because of how both of their offenses run. Boy, something happened to Barbers Hill's offense last week because they were down 21-0, had to freaking storm back just to lose in overtime. But if they're clicking, they have a quarterback that's very similar to DJ Bailey being under the radar, Cody Fuentes, although he does turn the ball over more than Bailey, which means one turnover because Bailey doesn't ever turn the ball over. I think that'll be an intriguing second-round matchup.
Really, both of these are anticipated second-round matchups will be good, as you kind of mentioned. The Lone Star, you might consider this the Lone Star bracket. Lone Star Forney, that is a really good game. And you look at Lone Star early in the season, turnovers were their problem. And right in the middle of the season, Forney had that offensive hiccups for a couple of weeks, which they seem to have figured out a little bit. But Lone Star Forney, I think we're going to have a shootout with that. And can Lone Star keep the turnovers at bay? Lone Star has figured it out, but they're not figuring it out against good teams. When you look back at their earlier rounds when they had to play good teams, they weren't necessarily playing great football, and Forney kind of had that same issue. So I call this the Forney bracket right now, but I think there's definitely a little bit of a claim for some other teams. And just to be fair, McKinney North, if you would have asked me 3 weeks ago, McKinney North, Barbers Hill, I might have taken McKinney North over Barbers Hill. But something has happened, and I don't know what that something is right now. But the last couple of weeks, they struggled with North Mesquite, 28-23 to do that. So this version of McKinney North is not the same McKinney North that it came out against Tyler High, and even Forney blew them out pretty big. So So the way that has trended the last couple of weeks for McKinney North, I think Barbers Hill is a favorite in this game. But McKinney North, again, we talked about Louisville and some of those other schools. McKinney North has a different gear. If they get some of their players back, if they can get there, I think they can go down to Barbers Hill and potentially win that game at their max. But they haven't played at their max the last 2 weeks. And so to me, I can't expect them to magically turn it on in the playoffs, having to make a 5-hour trip to do it.
Right. And we go down to the last part. We call it the Longview Pod, and rightfully so. I think the first two matchups are no-brainers. I think Longview takes care of Porter. I think Reedy takes care of Newman Smith. But I don't think that's the same for the other two, LaPorte and Lancaster, which I don't think is going to – well, LaPorte does bring people, and they're used to playing on the road because they played on the road every single game this year. And even though they get a home game, they're playing it on the road again at Sheldon C.E. King Stadium. So
how far is that away from me? Do you know the geography of that?
From LaPorte?
Yeah,
from LaPorte, that's a good 30 minutes away. So they're traveling a little bit, but it's
give us the DFW comparison. Like that would be like where would Lancaster be playing this game?
Oh yeah, that's interesting. That Lancaster would probably be playing in Dragon Stadium. That
okay.
Kind of distance.
So that is a significant that comparison. That's a significant.
And I think this is athletes. LaPorte has 2 1,000-yard rushers already. And they can also throw the ball, but these running backs can fly all over the field. We know Lancaster has the running backs as well, has the athletes as well to get all over the field. What would you think, athlete against athlete? Is Lancaster got things figured out where they can go down there and beat them if they don't have a humongous crowd down there for LaPorte cheering them on?
And this is one of those tough. I mean, I'm going to take Lancaster just because I don't know anything about LaPorte, but I don't have strong confidence in it. I mean, if Lancaster would have came out and beat Lufkin this past week, 35-7 or something, and give me that confidence that they can do this. I mean, they had to win that game with a fourth quarter drive. They were down 27-21 late. Now they did it. It happened. They made the right plays in the fourth quarter. But Lancaster has not given us the confidence. But we talk about ceilings and potential ceilings. Lancaster's potential. I mean, we ranked them number 3 to start things out. It was Aledo, Longview, and Lancaster. Those are our big 3 to get started this year. And Lancaster has the talent to defend that high of a ranking. They just haven't had the performance to defend that high of a ranking. I think if we would have talked about it in the campfire, who do you like, Ward? Week 1, LaPorte or Lancaster, you're going to be like, oh, Lancaster is going to take care of business. The performance hasn't been there, and LaPorte hasn't given us that consistency. And we talk about that district. Yes, it's very strong at the top, but how good is that district now that we've seen the parity in that district? We know what Lancaster has. We've seen them against South Oak Cliff, even though that was a losing effort. We've seen them against Forney. We've seen them play Longview well. I think if they can tap into that, even on the road, I think they can beat LaPorte.
Interesting. I think that's a true 50-50. And I almost think this Wakefield Timberview could be a true 50-50 because Timberview's proven against a good quarterback, they have their defense gets moved upon. And that's Brennan Meyer is a good quarterback, and they can move the ball. Now, granted, it's up at Newsom, so it's a true road game. That's a far drive for the Wakeland fans, but I don't know, man. I think that's 50-50 to me. What do you think?
I think it's 60-40 just because I look at Wakeland over the last 3 weeks. We saw the Frisco. Frisco played Reedy. Frisco played Lone Star. Frisco played Wakeland. Reedy blew them out. Lone Star blew them out. Wakeland, that was a 50-50 game for a while. It took the fourth quarter before Wakeland was able to do that. So for me, that Frisco anemic offense was able to score against Wakeland's defense. Timberview should have a field day against that. Now, can Timberview stop Wakeland? They couldn't stop Richland. So I think we're going to have a little bit of a shootout here. But I think the athletes for Timberview give me a little bit of an edge. I think Timberview is going to win like a 49-35 type of game. But I think it'll be back and forth, one score. And finally, in that fourth quarter, Timberview will break through and get that. I think that this is where that Richland game is going to help them now that they've seen that team and they're not going to get punched in the face in the first round. We're going to talk about that in Division II, about how I'm a little bit worried about South Oak Cliff because they didn't have to play anybody. And even going into the campfire, you were worried about Timberview because you were worried that they weren't going to play anybody till the first round, and then how was that going to happen? Richland gave them that. So I think kind of to your point of how that helped Aledo, I think that's going to help Timberview as well.
Yeah. That's true. And Pat Doney's going to dust off all that, or get all that champagne out of his hair, and finally get back out on a big game Friday night because he's done with the Rangers, and he'll be at that one to give us all the action. So that'll be cool. Hey,
Has he
let's
got the
move on.
chlorine out of his hair? I saw he jumped in the Diamondbacks pool. I
He
don't know
did
if
jump
that.
in there. I wonder
Who
if
knows what matter of chlorine is in that thing at this point?
he may be so jacked up, he may not knowing where he's at. He may show up with the champagne goggles on to do his report at Newsom Stadium. That'd be kind of bizarre, but he could do it. All right, let's move on to Division Two.
Big game Friday night. You never know what you're going to get from that Pat.
Exactly.
He's a crazy guy. He's like the wild and crazy guy. Just do
He
anything.
gave you a shout out this week, so that was pretty nice of him.
That
Unprovoked.
was very nice of him. Thank you, Pat.
Unprovoked. Congratulations. Hey, we go to Division Two. You call it the Emerson bracket, and Emerson went ahead and played themselves into a road game. They get to go to Grapevine because they couldn't finish the deal with Lake Dallas. They couldn't finish the deal against Argyle, so they ended up with 2 losses. Now they're heading to Grapevine for a Thursday night game. What's your thoughts on that one? And then also give me some thoughts on the Lake Dallas Arlington Heights, because that's a Lake Dallas team that we got to figure out what team's going to show up.
Well, Ward, I feel like you need to give me a little bit of coaching. Am I being disrespectful calling this the Frisco Emerson bracket, despite the fact that Lake Dallas beat them?
No, because I'm gonna go back to last week. That's a one-off. That Lake Dallas thing's a one-off. So you play them 9 more times. It's 9 more wins for the Wolverines or for Frisco Emerson.
I agree. The Mavericks, I think, are going to continue that basis. Grapevine just does not look like anything I expect out of Grapevine right now. I think Frisco Emerson's going to take care of business. Arlington Heights has even shown me a little bit of a struggle. I think Lake Dallas is going to get up on Arlington Heights. Really, it's kind of funny because you look at the top half of the bracket in Canutillo and Palo Duro, and at least what I'm seeing, Ryder is the team that scares me more out of the West Texas teams than Canutillo or Palo Duro. So Emerson avoiding that until the third round, I think, is going to be a big benefit. Ryder has been up and down because I pick Ryder, and there are games I'm picking them to win and they're losing, and there's games I'm picking them to lose and they win. So Ryder has a big talent spectrum as well, where they can play up and play down to their opponents. So I'm most interested of all the West Texas teams. I think Wichita Falls Ryder has the biggest chance to make a statement, but really this is not great football in this pod, and I think that Frisco Emerson is probably talent-wise by far the best of these 8 teams. Now, will the performance hit? Because we talked earlier, what happens when you actually play, like with Cedar Hill. We talked about Cedar Hill playing teams at their level. Well, Emerson has played 2 teams at their level, maybe you could argue slightly above it, in Argyle and Lake Dallas, and they lost both of those games. But when they played everybody else, they looked great. So how is Emerson going to play when now their games are going to be at teams at their level? We're going to have to find out.
That will be interesting. And if you go to the next pod, the Argyle pod, I don't want to be disrespectful. It's fairly uninteresting 8 team bracket with 2 stud teams in there that are looking like a steamroll to play each other with Argyle and Colleyville Heritage. But you look at that, and Colleyville Heritage had all kinds of problems with Wyatt. I didn't even check the box scores. Cade Barrett back?
No, he was not back, and that makes it even
more troubling. Yeah, exactly.
More troubling for Colleyville Heritage. I think Argyle is probably going to win every game in this pod by at least 3 scores, getting back to that rematch against Emerson. Argyle is young, and this is the problem with Argyle, is that they're so young, and you're giving them extra weeks of experience now. And they are learning every single week. This is a team that, they got all these sophomores, and they're looking at 2 years from now being, the Alito of this division in a couple of years. Like, we're going to beat everybody by 40 or 50 in a couple of years. But these young kids are getting those repetitions now, and they're building up confidence. It's kind of like the Rangers in a way. Right. It's like you don't want to get the Rangers going because, you get them ahead of schedule, and then they're not going to understand that they're supposed to lose, and they may not lose. And you look at things, and why not Argyle? I mean, we look at even the bottom half of the bracket. Argyle was not competitive with Melissa, was not competitive against Lovejoy, but last year they were competitive with South Oak Cliff. So if they can get there and they get the confidence, it's hard to count out the name of Argyle. Coach Rogers does such a great job. I still, though, believe in the talent of Emerson. I think Emerson has better talent than anybody in this 16, the 2 pods, the Emerson pod and the Argyle pod. but they got to learn how to win those games. Argyle learned how to win those games from their earlier experiences. Now, will Emerson learn what Argyle learned? Argyle got hit in the mouth by Melissa and Lovejoy, and they learned from it. Will Emerson getting hit in the mouth by Lake Dallas and Argyle help them learn and get better? That's what we're going to be finding out come November 30th and November 31st.
Yeah.
Or December 1st. I don't think we have a November 31st word. I'm making updates on this.
You're making updates, man. You got some sort of leap year nonsense going on its own. Let's talk about the bottom 16. There's a lot of talent down there. The South Oak Cliff Pod. They got a first-round matchup with Everman, and usually it's the first round where South Oak Cliff treads a little bit, stumbles a little bit, because, they played Everman 2 years ago, and Everman gave them a good half, and then they fell off in the second half. We know what happened with Summit last year. We talked about it a lot. That was a very close game down to the wire. Is Everman going to give them another game to get them kick-started, get SOC kick-started?
Looking at South Oak Cliff, they're back under the radar again because of Dave Campbell's and some other people not giving them the number one seed. If you go to your Inside High School Sports rankings, we do give them the number one seed, at least in our area. We don't do state rankings. We just do North Texas rankings, and I've had South Oak Cliff from bell to bell as our number one team, despite a couple of losses against the Duncanvilles and DeSotos of the world. But you expect those kind of games when you're playing the Duncanvilles and DeSotos of the world, because SOC takes on everybody, but they beat Lancaster and they beat Parish Episcopal, and they take care of business when they need to take care of business. I feel like Everman, the way they've been trending the last couple of weeks, this isn't that Summit team like from last year where, they've got all of the talent. Everman, despite having high expectations, they've kind of floundered a bit in their run. So I think this is going to be a good test for South Oak Cliff. I think South Oak Cliff is going to win this game between 14 and 21, but I think it's going to give them that test that they're going to need for the second round, because they thought they might be seeing Lovejoy in the second round. Well, last week that didn't happen. Our Lovejoy prediction over Melissa came through, and now we're going to see Melissa versus South Oak Cliff. So this is a lot of people, not mine, but a lot of people's number one versus number two going into the second round of the playoffs. But last year, White House is a team that's going to give Melissa a little bit of a test. And if Melissa has a hangover from that game against Lovejoy, this could be a potential upset, even though I'm talking about how good Melissa is. White House is good enough to get in an offensive shootout with Melissa, and I think that's how they're going to have to do it, because we saw that Melissa defensively will give up some points, but offensively they don't play very good against good defenses, and that could have been a little bit of malaise. It could have been them not expecting it, maybe being a little bit of overconfident, maybe reading their own press clippings, but you can't be reading your press clippings being in a South Oak Cliff pod where you've got the reigning and defending two-time state champions looking at you in the second round.
Yeah, and on the top five for that pod, you got Midlothian Heritage, who should have absolutely no problem with Woodrow, and then you like that Marshall-Denison game. Tell me a little bit about that before we move to the bottom half.
8-5A, we talk about all these districts that seem to be on the outside of our area that are playing in the first round of the playoffs. We've been seeing crazy things happen. We talked about 8-5A. We talked about 12-6A. Last week in 8-5A Division II, you saw Longview Pine Tree beat Texas High. And last year, this was a district where the our district swept them out. And one of the bigger upsets was Terrell beating Texas High. I very well think we might see this happen again, where the 7-5A Division II beats all of the 8-5A Division II. But the one game I do think that East Texas has a clear advantage is this Marshall versus Denison. As we're going to talk about in a little bit, Texas High versus Terrell. Texas High lost to Terrell last year, and now Texas High, 2 weeks before they lost to Terrell last year, they lost to White House, and they kind of limped into the playoffs. Now Texas High limps into the playoffs, losing to Longview Pine Tree. After we saw Texas High beat Colleyville Heritage and beat Frisco Lone Star, now it seems like a little bit of their diamond has been lost, the shine of their diamond. I don't know what we're going to get out of East Texas. I mean, you could see a situation where White House is competitive with Melissa, Marshall beats Denison, Texas High beats Terrell. I don't think Pine Tree is going to push Longview very much, but Pine Tree was good enough to beat Texas High, and Texas High was good enough to beat Frisco Lone Star this year, so you can at least see the transitive pathway as far as that goes. But I'm not feeling very trusting of that East Texas district. But again, I almost like Marshall over Denison more than I like Terrell or Texas High over Terrell, just because of the history we saw last year. And I don't know how much I trust Denison at the end of the day, but the team, and I talked about it in the dump ward, I am so impressed with Midlothian Heritage because they have played such consistent football throughout the year. All these other teams, you see ups and downs and this and that. Midlothian Heritage has played at a high level, and that makes them an incredibly dangerous team. They're going to be hard to pick against, and if you're playing them, they're going to be hard to beat. So Midlothian Heritage is a really, really good team. I think they're going to sail to the third round of the playoffs, but how that's going to work against either South Oak Cliff or Melissa, time will tell.
Right. You look at that lower thing, and you touched on it plenty of times when we talked about the topper, but look who's sitting there waiting for Texas High against Terrell. I think this time Texas High takes them because they're certainly not going to be taking them lightly after how they ended their season last year. Summit's probably easily going to get through Seagoville. Ennis, despite having the injury at quarterback, Grayson Harris is their best player, and he looks like he's down. I still think they take care of Kimball, and Lovejoy takes care of Pine Tree. So talk about that Terrell Texas High game.
Terrell, Texas High, we saw what happened last year. Terrell's got that running game. If they can play at their high level, I think they can constrict the game. Now, there were some turnovers last year in that Texas High game, so Terrell's going to need a little bit of that magic. But this is definitely one of that 20% of the game that you have on upset watch. I'm leaning toward picking Terrell. By the time I'm doing my picks on Wednesday night, I might go back to Texas High. It's one of those 50-50 coin flips just because Texas High on paper should beat Terrell. But Texas High on paper should have beat Longview Pine Tree. If you're asking me this week, Longview Pine Tree or Terrell, I'm taking Terrell without a doubt over Longview Pine Tree. Now, all of a sudden, we have Longview Pine Tree beating Texas High last week. What are the factors? And I don't get to research the East Texas stuff as much as I would like to. What were the factors in Longview Pine Tree beating Texas High? Is Texas High injured? Was Texas High resting players? We just don't know. So I got to dig into that. If I'm reading into it and Texas High went full bore and lost to Pine Tree, I'm probably going to stick with Terrell. But if I'm looking at that and they're resting players and it really didn't matter to their bracketology whether they won or lost that game and they just kind of took it easy, then I might lean toward Texas High. But Lovejoy is clearly the best team in this 8-team pod. But here you go. We got playoff Mansfield Summit Ward. We talk about that is one of the scariest teams you want to see. Mm-hmm. Mansfield Summit turns it on in the playoffs, unlike any team in the playoffs over the last 3 to 5 years.
And they can get it rolling there. They can get a really like a snowball thing going. If they can take care of Seagoville, Terrell, and then run into Lovejoy with some sort of momentum going on, that could be a flashy game there. That could be something special.
Absolutely.
But you saw Lovejoy's defense. I don't know. And some of it is prone to turning that thing over. So I maybe have to say the buck stops there, but they're a dangerous team there. And
I'm thinking back because you don't really get to know how good Lovejoy's defense is because they don't play a lot of teams. And you look at that, you go back to the very kind of their non-district schedule. They bullied North Crowley around for about a quarter. Like that game, it got ugly, but that's the game they got injured, and all their injuries kind of started in that game. And then North Crowley asserted their dominance on them in the second half. So you can kind of view that game as a little bit of an outlier. You view that College Station game at the very beginning of the year where, College Station got out on them early with a couple of big plays, but then they came back and took care of business. But College Station is the team we're going to be talking about probably in December, and Lovejoy took care of them as well. So Lovejoy is a really, really good team, and they're going to be scary to beat. And Mansfield Summit, their strength is their defense, and so that could just be a slugfest. That could be like a 10-7 game on a cold Friday night, maybe at Choctaw Stadium or something for that game, and who knows how that will end up. But I like Lovejoy. Peyton Pierce, you showed me his a potential mock-up of what a bobblehead might look like with him. I don't know if that's going to get edited out or something like, we don't talk about that kind of thing. That's why
he's already gotten it. He
already got it.
He has it in his hand.
Watch our show.
Exactly. Way to pay attention, Diggs. He's got it sitting up on his mantle somewhere. Well, that was fun, Diggs. I enjoyed talking about 6 and 5A. We're gonna talk more about 4 and 3A as we whittle down some of these.
No, we're not. You hate that stuff. You're not going to talk about.
We won't go down to 2A. We won't go down to 1A. But we'll talk some 4 and 3A once we get the playoff field cut in half.
Talk about Celeste and Seymour. You don't want to talk about that stuff. But let's give a shout out to Panther Creek. I mean, Panther Creek beat Salina last week. Big game. Controversy. I love controversial endings. Yeah. Was it an interception? Was it not? Everybody's got their opinion on it.
Interception. It was 100% an interception, but hey, it happens. That's the way it goes.
Yeah, I agree. It was 100% interception, but you asked Panther Creek, it wasn't. You got simultaneous possession.
That's the kind of stuff that can motivate a team like Salina.
Yes.
That now they're like, okay, obviously a 10-point lead wasn't good enough, so now we're going to start pounding these playoff teams because who knows what's going to happen down the stretch. You saw my example is Panther Creek. Do you want me to show you this film again? Coach Elliott will say, in between lifting weights, do you want me to show you this video again? Because that's what happened to us. So now don't slack on anybody because they got Paris right off the bat. It's not like they're playing.
Yeah, and Paris played Anna to 1 point, 2 weeks ago. And now Anna playing some very competitive football unexpectedly. Sulphur Springs, that was a close game. Paris, that was a 1 point game going into that. So Anna's lost a little bit of the shine. China Spring, the defending state champion. We don't know what we're getting out of them. We know Stephenville beat them. There's a lot to talk about before A, but we will not be talking about it because Ward hates small schools, and he will not let any sort of talking about it. But maybe I can slip him $100 bill, and maybe he'll let us talk about it.
We'll get him in next week. Plus, this music here tells me that we're out of time, nohow. So they're running us off, man. They're playing us off.
Playing us off.
Considering I'm the
Thank you, Ward, for giving us a game Ward for the playoffs. We talk about teams needing to step up for the playoffs. My guy Wizzy stepped up. Give him a DM. Tell him what a great job he did. See him on the sideline. Let him know, because we got to get more of this kind of Wizzy out there. This is the Wizard right here, our trivia expert playing us out. Thank you, Wizzy, for your A game. I needed you. You brought me up this week. Thank you.
I appreciate it, and I apologize to all the viewers for my D game weeks 1 through 16 or 11 or whatever I did. But I appreciate it. We'll talk again next week, Diggsy.
See you next week, Wizzy. We'll see you down the road.